Mr. Abbasi, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Pleasure.
You are here to talk about the Balkanization of the Middle East. Can you please explain in greater detail what you mean by that?
The recent phenomenon that you have with the so-called IS, ISIL, ISIS or Daesh, and the fragmentation of existing Arab states across the MENA region, now that poses a question, a long-term question, and in fact it is one of the to-do lists on IS or ISIL's wish list, is that to carve up the colonially imposed national boundaries and to have one undivided Islamic Caliphate, or that is their version of this. Now, this process has been unwittingly or unwillingly been aided by the forces of history, politics, international relations, and socioeconomic pressures. And if you want to visit this, it's all about basically the succession of the Ottoman Empire. We come to the one simple problem, because after the 1914-1918 war, which we call the First World War, the Ottoman Empire was dismembered. So large portions of the Ottoman Empire was ceded to the two victorious powers, namely the British and the French, with their respective mandates. And one of the problems was that during the First World War, you had the Arabs with the Sharif of Mecca, with Lawrence of Arabia. Now, he was given to understand that there would be one united Arab home state to rule. But eventually, that was undercut because you had the Balfour Agreement with, again, at the end of the day, giving the Jews a separate homeland. You had the Sykes-Picot Agreement with British and French mandates. Now, all of those different tensions eventually led to a very different kind of Middle East. Right now, if we can come quickly to the present-day scenario, let's see what has happened after the most recent intervention in the Middle East. Iraq is already fragmented. To all purpose and extent, it has been fragmented into three large portions. You have the Sunni triangle over here, you have the largely Shia south, and you have the Erbil province with the Kurdish autonomy. So three states already. So almost it's operating on the verge of a federal state, all but in name. If you go, again, at the end of the day, within the MENA region over there, in case of Libya too, it has already, at the end of the day, bifurcated. The coastal regions and the inner regions, there is, again, at the end of the day, huge gap. So there is a very loose structure at best. Now, if you are going into Syria, and the world's attention is riveted to Syria, Syria is also on the verge of implosion. Now, you have the Russians stabilizing for a point, but we have seen also that Russia's limitations in terms of resources, even in case of US's involvement in Vietnam, what has happened is that there's only a finite time for which you can commit your resources. Sooner or later, you have to withdraw. The USSR withdrew from Afghanistan, and the communist-supported government fell. So over here also, Syria is on the verge of implosion. And that brings us to the key pressure driver, the Kurds. And in case of the Kurds, this is a major problem for almost all the existing Arabs and non-Arab countries as well. The Turks and the Iranians and the Armenians, the Syrians, the Iraqis have all substantial Kurdish population. This again goes back to the unresolved question of the post-World War I succession disputes, because initially President Wilson stated that there should be a free homeland for the Kurds. It was never taken up because, again, geopolitical factors, Turkey re-exerting itself after 1922 under the leadership of Kemal Atatürk. Now, the treaty was again modified. Then again, there is, so Iran has a strategic interest to, again, not have a very strong Kurdish state. The Turks likewise have a strong interest. The Arabs have likewise a strong interest. And in the recent past, after the Arab Spring, we also see the much hype talk of Shia Crescent taking into reality. So the substantial Shia minority population, who were Arabs, historically, traditionally, culturally, now in Iraq, in Bahrain, in Oman, now these places have substantial Iraqi or substantial Arab Shia population. Now, even in case of Saudi Arabia, the recent unrest in Saudi Arabia with the Al-Ansar province, now 10% of Saudi Arabia are Shias, but they claim that with the execution of Sheikh Nimir al-Nimir, again, that they are second-class citizens. So, along with this, factor in the low oil prices. One of the reasons why in Middle East, at least purportedly, authoritarian regimes have succeeded was because of a social compact, that the ruler or the ruling regime provides a social welfare state, and people have no say in the run of the government, at least for the Gulf states. And this model has been replicated by and large by authoritarian regimes. But with the oil war that is going in, with Saudi Arabia refusing to budge in cuts in oil production, oil has come to an all-time low. And along with this, the substantial oil reserves that you have amongst non-OPEC members like Russia, now Saudi Arabia has started painful economic reforms, which is an indicator. Except for a few countries such as UAE and Qatar, there has not been any substantial export diversification. Now, if Saudi Arabia is introducing VAT, Saudi Arabia is introducing power and utility hikes, income taxes, and again, people are finding it difficult. In many cases, it's the government which runs the private sector, not vice versa. So the government has to scale down on expenditure, and they're coming up with the dirty word, reforms. So already this has exacerbated existing tensions, because in the Shia dominant regions, which is oil rich, they're saying, look, we are not politically being underrepresented. We are at the end of the day have no say in the running of the government. Along with this, you have painful economic reforms. As the Americans, you say, no taxation without representation. So if you have economic reforms, the claim for better governance, accountability, transparency will only increase. And when that will be denied, the regional tensions will only exacerbate. Case in point, Yemen united after 30 or 40 years of staying apart, North Yemen and South Yemen, now it's being riven. So you have the Zaydis who are nominal Shias, very moderate Shias. Now they are becoming more extreme in their outlook because of, at the end of the day, foolhardy Saudi intervention. So even within Yemen, you have the Houthi rebels over here, and you have the rest of the Gulf supported, or some of the Gulf supported states coming in. In Egypt, at the end of the day, there is a status quo. Certain areas are again restive along the border in Sinai Desert. In Algeria, this is the difference between the Berbers and the Arabs. Already we see this case in Sudan. So the existing power structures are fragmenting into pieces. And also there's a lot of tension with Iran's reemergence, and the Gulf countries think, rightly or wrongly so, history will only point out, that again, at the end of the day, Iran is exporting a lot of instability in order to achieve greater strategic depth. In Lebanon, you have a form of federal structure, but again, the Shia-dominated Hezbollah has already usurped power. And they're deep in Syria, they are in Iraq, you have the revolutionary Al-Quds Guards over there also in both the places. So Iraqi strategic depth is increasing. Now, the question, which is again a catch-22 situation, is for the US and the EU and the West, is what to do. Because right now, if we continue to support the existing regimes, there will be further grievances, and just like Arab Spring has turned into Arab Winter, this can take the form of even greater form of social discontent. So do we continue supporting, at the end of the day, our tried and established partners, but risk further alienation? Or do we try to move to a path or gently nudge them at times, use greater coercive pressure, and move for democracy in the region, greater participation in the region, but that might lead to greater fragmentation in the region, and that will be diluting again, or diluting the existing relationship between the West, the US, and the Gulf and the Middle East nations, or in this case lead to greater instability. So the process of Balkanization that started with the Ottoman Empire in the 1890s, we see that somehow after 100 years, exactly 100 years, we find out that almost the entire map of the Middle East that was drawn by the victors of First World War is at stake. One, because of internal economic pressures. Two, because of internal political reasons. Three, because of external meddling. And four, at the end of the day, because of ideological confusion. So all of them have combined into some kind of lethal, toxic mix. And the demographic bulge that you have. So within the MENA region, at least 60% of the population are between less than 25. And the youth unemployment is as high as 30 to 40%. The state is running, giving them subsidies, but for how long? The states are also feeling the pinch. We can say very well they have the Sovereign Welfare Fund. It is meant for, at the end of the day, stabilization of the economy during rough times. They can sell off resources. But again, the ruling clique are alleged to have a far greater share of the pie. And in this environment, we know as economists, as historians, as political scientists, during the era of economic crisis, when your wallet is feeling the pinch, regional tensions exacerbate, hatred increases because of difference in religious sects and denomination, which happened in Weimar Germany during the era of Great Depression and led to the rise of Adolf Hitler. So this process of Balkanization is a reality. It cannot be scoffed at. And this is exactly what the regional Gulf powers, or let's say the MENA powers, the Middle East and North African powers, they're afraid of. And this is one of the claims that IS, ISIL, ISIS, Daesh wants to implement. And the US is now caught in a bind, and the West is caught in a bind. That means, how do you balance between your different, at times different and divergent objectives of promoting greater human rights, greater democracy, greater participation, more amity between nations, and which is also going to help American strategic interests or US strategic interests. And number two, reducing sources of conflict. Because for sure, if there's greater support shown to the Kurds in Syria, already they have almost all of the border with Turkey is under their domination. It is a matter, and they've already stated that they want a federal structure, they want an important voice. And again, the Iraqs and Kurds, though they have a better relationship with the Turks than the Kurds in Syria, they have a strong position of within this place. And with the opening up of Iran, the Arabs in Iran, who have long been neglected, or the Kurds in Iran, who have been at least sidelined, and even the Kurds in Armenia, who are slightly oppressed, they can think that why not come up and form our own region? And then what happens to the minority groups? We only talk about the Yazidis because they came into the spotlight. But what about the Mandeans? What about the Assyrian Christians? What about even the Maronites, who have become a significant minority because of migration from Lebanon and the Middle East? So even if you talk about the Eastern Orthodox Christians in Egypt, they also are facing the pressure, and there is rising inter-religious conflicts. So all of these regions, all of these things promotes, or at least promises, unfortunately, greater instability. So these issues need to be addressed at the core.
Okay. Great, thank you. If I could ask one follow-up question.
Yes, please.
The picture you paint is dire, to say the least, and full of complexity for people who are studying the region and also deal with public policy. But you seem to be implying that there's going to be a very long period of instability. Would you agree with that? And what kind of time frame are we talking about here? If we're talking about the fragmentation to a certain degree of the Middle East and North Africa, are we talking decades? Are we talking years? In your estimation, what do you see as the kind of this very difficult maelstrom that has to be faced?
Well, Jeff, you're quite right. I am an economist by profession, so again, I believe in the Malthusian gloom and doom. But if you look into the history of the Middle East, stages in transition have been always chaotic. So when a strong central power or a group of powers collapse, there has been an interregnum of at least 50 to 60 years through which, again, the new order is reestablished. This has been the case even before pre-Islamic Arabia, when you had, again, at the end of the day, the Ghassanis and the Lakhmids, two central powers. When they went away, there was vacuum, and eventually the two superpowers, the Byzantine Empire and which is the Eastern Roman Empire, and the Sassanid Persian Empire fell in. And the Islamic invasion, the Muslim invasion of 40 or 50 years, it was organized chaos. So again, it took a long time. The collapse of the Abbasid caliphates with regional powers springing in, now that was again organized chaos. That took around 50, 60 years. In the 8th century, you had a sect called the Karamatiyans, the first organized communists. So they were a heretical sect, almost like IS of today, and that took at least 50 years to suppress. It may not take 50 years, but at least with the global economy not performing the way it is, with regional income inequality being exacerbated, with, at the end of the day, lack of governance and transparency, and in this internet age of global technology, probably this instability is going to continue for at least another 2 decades before some sense of order comes. But I do believe, again, that there is no need to despair, but these things take time because they are systemic. So it will take a long, holistic approach, and it needs patience and concerted strategic partnership between the different powers. Because again, not necessarily the different major powers have the same interests. So if you have divergence of interests, there will be room for confusion. So it will at least take at least another 15, 20 years, at least this is my estimate, so for things to be corrected.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, sir, for your comments. We appreciate it a great deal.
Same here, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.